Synchronicity, coincidence. Why do things seem to be so bizarrely connected? Why is it that you're so conscious of somebody looking at you when you can't see them? Or you may think of somebody, in that moment the phone rings or they appear at the door. It's got to be more than just luck. I mean, statistically, it would be insane to calculate the likelihood of some events. And they constantly lead me back to the fact there must be an underlying undercurrent, if you like, force that drives things. And that, I guess, is a belief system or spirituality. If I share with you a couple of things that have happened to me, you will understand why I don't believe it's just luck. So a couple of years ago I was thinking, I really want to do a kind of little road trip adventure. Where can I go? Something that's like an adventure, a little journey of discovery, spirituality. And what popped into my head was St Michael's Mount down near Cornwall. Devon, not sure. And I've been there before, and I would say it's a very powerful place from a natural beauty perspective. If you've never been there, it's the only place I've ever been to in the world that actually is connected to the land by a causeway. So forgive me, I'm just ducking under the trees here, walking through the woods. And so when the tide is out, you can walk along the causeway and walk to this place, and when the tide is in, you can no longer get access other than by boat. And for that reason, it seems to hold a kind of special energy or feeling of being special and isolated. And there were monasteries, or there was a monastery there for some time, I believe. I don't know if it's, I don't know the history well, but I was talking to one of the curators there, and she said the monks would come there to see if they could survive, frankly, through the year as a way to cut their teeth and learn to manage the monastic life. I mean, when you've got a winter storm whipping up there, it must be one hell of a tough place to be, and there's not much land for growing food in the salt air, so they certainly picked their challenges. But I had this image of St Michael's Mount in my mind, and then I couldn't work out, was it given to me, or did it come from my own mind as I associate it with something spiritual, somewhere I might like to go, holidays. So I thought, well, the best way to work this out is to let it rest. Don't overthink it. See if it comes back. And it must have been that evening or the next evening, I went to the chip shop up the road, and on the wall they have a TV screen showing places and natural, like a screensaver, you know, beautiful places. And St Michael's Mount was there as I turned, bosh, and it really hit me, and I thought, wow, that's kind of confirmation for me. But when I look it up, it's 7 hours drive from where I am. So I thought, I don't really want to spend 7 hours driving to somewhere. If I'm not really meant to go there. It's just a kind of vanity thing. I'm thinking, yeah, that's where I should be going when there's no need. It's not really the right place. So I compromised with myself and I said, why don't I go to Glastonbury tour, which is a kind of halfway. And Glastonbury tour, for anyone who's ever been there, to my mind is a most incredible energy centre. It has a dragon line or ley line that passes through it. I think it's called St Michael's, I'm not sure. The only thing I would say is, even at the young age of perhaps 18, I remember sitting on top of it and feeling like I was sitting on a kind of power generator. And I wasn't a particularly spiritually aware person at all, but I just couldn't deny this humming kind of energy that was underneath me. It felt like it kind of lifted my etheric body. It probably did, but anyway. So I thought, let's go to St Michael's Mount. I'll go there. So let me go to Glastonbury tour. There I know I'll have a spiritual experience, so my purpose, for the trip will be meaningful. And then if I feel led to St Michael's Mount from there, I'm halfway there already. So this seemed like a good plan. I looked at places to stay and I was very tempted with an old inn at the centre of Glastonbury. But in the end I decided against it, thought let's be practical and booked a travel lodge. Anyway, I drove to Glastonbury, and whilst I was up on the tour, I was laying there and there was a young couple, not together but friends I'd say, and they were talking and he was playing music blaring out, and the grumpy old man in me got frustrated and thought, of all the places to blare your stereo, this is meant to be a sort of epicenter of spirituality. But then I realised I am just being a grumpy old man, and I should just go with it. But I'm lying there, and then I hear him say to this girl, well, my dad had cannabis psychosis. And that blew me away, because I suffered from cannabis psychosis when I was young, and I have never heard the term used publicly other than by myself, let alone met anyone who's suffered from it. So I just knew that that was more than coincidence. Anyway, without going into too much detail about that, I went into the town to get something to eat, and the restaurant I liked the look of, I walked in and they said, I'm sorry, we've stopped serving. And I said, oh, what time? And they said 9 o'clock, and it wasn't yet 9. And I thought, I was tempted to stand my ground, but I thought, again, just go with it. So I thought, I'll go to the next nearest one, which happened to be the old inn that I was thinking of staying in. So I thought, well, that's good. So I went in there, and there was a chap sitting alone having a pint. So I struck up a conversation with him. And we weren't talking long before we were on the subject of spirituality, as you do in Glastonbury. In fact, I probably opened with some line about it. And I said, well, I believe it's such a powerful place because of the ley lines. And I get the shivers when I say this, actually, because it wasn't... Are they ley lines, are they dragon lines? Well, the reason I asked that question is I was explaining to this gentleman, who was quite interested, about the concept of them, that these ley lines were there. And another gentleman within a couple of tables away piped up and volunteered the information that they're not ley lines, he said, they're dragon lines. And I said, well, what's the difference then? And he said, well, I'm a druid, and dragon lines are natural lines of energy, whereas ley lines are more human constructs. And I said, oh, thank you for enlightening us. What are you doing here? And he said, well, I'm actually here for a druid ceremony to celebrate the anniversary of our group. But he said, what you should know about that dragon line is, he said, it's the longest dragon line, I believe, in the world. I'm not sure if that's quite correct, but it's one of them. And he said, and it stops down at, here's the punchline, St. Michael's Mount. And I swear, when he said St. Michael's Mount, that for that moment, time stopped. And it was like being in a cartoon. You know, when it kind of goes, whoa. And I was just staggered. And I said, well, that's incredible you say that. Because I was actually on my way to St. Michael's Mount. And now I know that's where I must go. So anyway, we had a long evening of chatting. It was all very positive, I would say. The gentleman I first struck up the conversation with said he was very grateful for our conversation because he was feeling quite down and it really made his evening. So the next day I went off to St. Michael's Mount. So when I got to St. Michael's Mount, I was keen to learn more about the dragon lines or ley lines, and I thought, well, where would I experience them? As somebody who's sensitive, I wanted to, energetically sensitive, wanted to see if I could sense them. And so I went around the castle, but when I reached the chapel, I felt that was probably a good place to ask and see if anybody knew anything, or see if I could sense anything. And one of the curators, I said, do you know anything about ley lines? It's a National Trust property. And she said, oh, the ley line question, she said, you're only the second person this year to ask. I think it was midsummer. And she said, oh yes, she said, the woman who runs this centre, she's actually a dowser. And I start thinking, oh, this is quite remarkable, isn't it? It's only a National Trust property. I wouldn't expect it to, you know, it's a castle, essentially, a privately owned castle. So she said, she's a dowser. And she said, she can tell you all about them. She's not here today, but if you ask, I can give you a leaflet. And I said, well, where do they go? And she said, well, she says there's a portal right here, right beside me. So I thought, this is all going so well, it feels like it's kind of going somewhere. So I tried to kind of connect at the time at the altar. The thing I got was, I picked up was, what a hard life in the winter, the storms smashing against the rocks and you're isolated from the land at high tides, and it took a tough monk to survive that. I don't suppose the heating was great either. They certainly had no forests from which to take timber and heat the place with fire. So, but other than that, nothing revelationary. But I then went to the plateau, the gun plateau, and while I was there, I thought, I'm going to meditate and connect and see if something comes to me. So I did. And what I felt was quite powerful, really. I'm normally quite wary of anything that I don't feel is like obviously pure light initially, but this had a sense of stillness. It wasn't just light, it felt strong, very strong energy. And so I asked for a kind of name or something that I could attribute this to, and it said Chiron. Now I know somebody channels somebody called Cryon, so I asked for clarification. How is it spelt? And I definitely saw the K and then a Y, R-O-N, Chiron. And so I meditated on this for a while. It felt to me like a very strong hand, a guiding hand. And this is at the point of the cannon emplacement. And I thought, you know, you do want a bit of help if you're potentially being besieged or attacked by an enemy from the sea, and you're on a little rock in there on your own with only cannons for protection. You're going to hope every shot counts, aren't you? So it kind of made sense to me, but I couldn't make any more sense of it than that. So afterwards, I actually took some photos actually as well. I asked where the ley lines end, and the lady said to me there's a if you look, it looks like a giant reading a book. If you look from the shore, you look at the island, it looks like a giant reading a book, and they end about where, well, they go into the sea at that point. I find this fascinating, frankly, as an engineer that tries to measure and use energy, how these things may exist, but let's just take it as read. So anyway, I went away. I decided to do a bit of research on who's Chiron, and I looked up, and there was a Chiron. Anyone who's a bit of a Top Gear enthusiast may know that Bugatti produced a car by the same name. It's perhaps the first road legal 1,000 horsepower monster machine called the Chiron. Well, Chiron, it turns out, was a god of war, and I thought, well, I'm sure it was a K, but I thought Chiron, kind of god of war, kind of works quite well with a cannon plateau, doesn't it? But I was sure it was a K because I had asked specifically. I'd seen this K, and then I looked more deeply, specifically for K, and please forgive me if I get it incorrect, but my understanding was that there was a kind of lesser version, or maybe a culturally different version of Chiron, who was called Chiron. And he wasn't just a god of war, he was more a god of surgery, etc. Now for me, this was quite phenomenal, because as a medical device engineer who's entrepreneurial and has his own products and business, I'm always keen to know that I'm being kind of led towards things. And so to hear that he was a god of surgery, for me, was quite amazing, to be honest, that I had had this string of coincidences, as you can imagine now I've explained them, to take me to this point. And then I saw that he was a half man, half horse with a bow, who's actually the Sagittarius, isn't it? For astrologers, I'm sorry, I'm not knowledgeable in that area, but my star sign is Sagittarian, and frankly, it left me quite gobsmacked. So just, to take you back, I was fancying a little road trip. I end up thinking St Michael's Mount seeing it in the chip shop, not wanting to take the full chance, went to Glastonbury, heard somebody talking about cannabis psychosis, something that's very deep and personal to me. I'll share that in another time. And then met a druid who told me the ley line actually went to St Michael's Mount. And so I went to St Michael's Mount, spoke with the curator who pointed me to a portal, and I then went, meditated, and met Chiron, the god of surgery, who's a half man, half horse, as in the symbol of Sagittarian. I was quite astonished. But then it goes even further. So I've been going deep into the spiritual because there's a itch I can't scratch any other way. And I've spent so much time working as an entrepreneur alone in my field that I've really been forced to learn to go within to try to find inner strength to understand which way forward for guidance. And so I was very attracted to Dolores Cannon's technique, quantum healing. It's like a hypnosis technique where you are in a deep state of relaxation, and then you recall a previous life, and then you are able to help to identify any blockages in your life as a result, etc. I don't think I'll go into it in this video. Maybe I'll do a separate one in a minute about that. But cutting a long story short, during that process, I was asked, is there anybody I would like to connect with, or any life, another past life or a future life perhaps? And for some of you that's going to ring alarm bells. You're going to think, how can it be a future life? To which my very basic retort is, if Einstein's right and we need, or mass creates time, spirit is massless, maybe it really is a timeless place. Very difficult to process as a human, but let's just run with it for a moment. I experienced this connection with an energy, let's call it a being, Chiron. I didn't know whether it was somebody from the future, myself in a future incarnation, or I couldn't tell you, but I did experience a very strong connection and some very visceral imagery of what I would call ships and technological future. And I couldn't even say if this was connected with Earth. I couldn't tell you. But the thing that really blew my mind was that he then showed me the form of their ships, and the form of the ships had been impacted by my previous life. And forgive me if this sounds too grandiose, but you need to watch the video I do about the Dolores Cannon experience. But it showed me that previous impact had changed my genetic line, because in my previous life regression I was a woman that married into a different bloodline, a different tribe, and they worshipped birds. And these ships' designs, they mimic to some degree the wing of the bird. And he said to me, do you understand now that everything has a purpose? Everything takes you to somewhere else. And that really was profound for me. So I can give you a ton more coincidences, synchronicities, and maybe I'll put them in separate videos, because this is now half an hour. But I'll just leave you with, firstly, a thank you for listening to me, and secondly, to encourage you to explore your own synchronicities, because I think it's a way that your guides or your higher self communicate with us. They want to share something. They don't want to steamroll us and force us to see something, but they can guide us and show us if we will open the door first, let them in. So feel in your heart if something is meaningful to you. Try to feel that love and let that show you that this is a reality. And synchronicities and things that move you forward are doing just that, regardless of how it's happening. It's helping you along your path. So thank you for listening.